The restaurant is quiet enough that you can hear the ice shift in your glass. Third date. Good table. You chose it deliberately. Not the loudest place, not the most expensive, but the kind of room where conversations stay private and the lighting doesn't try too hard. You've done this before. You know how to set a scene. She's attractive, sharp. She laughs at the right moments and asks questions that sound like genuine curiosity. The evening has a rhythm to it, comfortable, unhurried. You've been enjoying yourself more than you expected. Then, somewhere between the entree and the second glass of wine, the rhythm changes. She leans forward slightly. Her fingers stop moving. Her eyes settle on yours with a different quality. Not warmer, just more focused. And she says it casually, almost as an aside. So, are you still working, or are you pretty well set at this point? The table doesn't go silent. No one looks over. The waiter passes without noticing. To anyone watching, it's just two adults having dinner. But something shifts in your chest. Not anger, not quite suspicion. Something more like a change in air pressure. Subtle, but registered. You smile. You answer something. Maybe you deflect. Maybe you're more open than you intended. Maybe you feel a pull to reassure her, to signal that yes, you're solid, you're fine, you've handled your life well. And the evening continues. But later, driving home, you replay that moment. The exact phrasing, the timing, the way her posture changed just before she asked. Most men let that replay fade. They decide it was innocent. Or they decide she was calculating, and they walk away without understanding what actually happened. There's something most men miss in that moment, and it has very little to do with her intentions. Let's stay at that table for a moment longer, because the real event wasn't the question. It was your response to it, not what you said, what you felt in the half second before you answered. For men who've spent decades building something, a business, a portfolio, a reputation, a life that finally has weight and stability, that question lands in a particular way. It doesn't just ask about money, it touches the architecture of your identity. You built something, you endured things to build it, losses, pressure, years of decisions made in uncertain rooms. And that accumulation, financial, experiential, relational, has become inseparable from how you understand your own standing in the world. So when a woman you've known for 3 evenings asks about your financial position, she isn't just asking a question, she's reaching towards something you've spent a lifetime constructing. And whether her motives are innocent or calculated, your nervous system doesn't distinguish that cleanly in the moment. What most men feel, and rarely name, is a specific kind of pride-vulnerability collision. On one side, the desire to be seen as a man who has handled his life, who isn't struggling, who arrived at this stage with something to show for it. That's not vanity. That's the legitimate satisfaction of a life well built. On the other side, the instinct, quiet but real, that revealing too much, too soon, to someone whose character you haven't yet fully read, carries a risk you can't easily calculate. These two forces don't fight openly. They produce something murkier, a mild compulsion to impress, wrapped in a thin layer of caution. And what often comes out is neither honest restraint nor confident disclosure. It's a kind of anxious middle ground. You signal enough to reassure without meaning to. You answer a question you didn't need to answer yet. Here's what that moment is actually revealing: how tightly your sense of value is still attached to being seen as financially capable by someone new. That's not a character flaw. It's deeply human and specifically shaped by the generation most of these men came from, where a man's worth was legible in what he provided, what he owned, what he'd built. Retirement doesn't dissolve that wiring. Neither does divorce. Neither does 60 years of self-reliance. But awareness of that wiring is the beginning of something more powerful than either disclosure or deflection. Because the real question isn't, should I tell her? The real question is, why do I feel pressure to answer at all? Before we go further, something important needs to be said. Because any framework applied without nuance becomes dogma, and men of experience deserve better than dogma. Not every early financial question is a red flag. Some women ask because they've been in relationships where financial incompatibility caused real damage. They've watched marriages dissolve over money. They've supported partners who weren't honest about debt. They've learned, sometimes painfully, that financial transparency matters, and they'd rather raise it early than pretend it doesn't exist. That's not manipulation. That's someone who's done her own internal accounting and decided not to waste time. Some women are financially independent themselves and are quietly assessing compatibility, not access. They want to know if you're in roughly the same chapter of life, not because they need your resources, but because shared financial reality shapes how two people live together. And some questions that sound like probing are actually just nervous conversation. Not every woman has the social fluency to ask what she really means elegantly. Sometimes, "Are you set?" is a clumsy way of asking, "Do you still enjoy what you do, or has life worn you down?" So the skill isn't suspicion. The skill is reading. And reading requires that you not react from the pride-vulnerability collision described in the last chapter. Because if you're still responding from that wiring, either by oversharing to prove yourself or by going cold to protect yourself, you're not reading her. You're reacting to your own history. Here's where discretion becomes an art form rather than a rule. The same question, asked at the same moment, can mean entirely different things depending on what preceded it. Did the conversation feel mutual or did it feel like an interview? Did she share something personal before she asked? Did the question arrive after warmth or instead of it? Context doesn't excuse a probing question, but it does inform what the question is. And a man who can make that distinction calmly, without defensiveness, without performance, is operating at a level most people never reach. The goal is not to build walls. The goal is to stay clear-eyed when the emotional weather changes. So what does a man with real authority actually do in that moment? He doesn't deflect nervously. He doesn't over-explain. He doesn't perform nonchalance or manufacture mystery. And he doesn't answer a question he hasn't decided to answer yet. He does something far more controlled. He responds to the spirit of the question, not the content of it. If she asks whether you're set, you might say, with complete ease, no edge in your voice, "I've been fortunate, I've built a good life." That's probably enough detail for a Tuesday evening. And then you move on, not abruptly, not coldly. You redirect with the same warmth the conversation had before. You're not punishing her for asking. You're simply not allowing the conversation to enter a room it hasn't earned access to yet. That response does several things simultaneously. It confirms stability without disclosing specifics. It demonstrates that you're not rattled, which itself communicates more about your character than any number would. It signals self-possession. I decide what I share and when. And it keeps the conversation moving in a direction you're choosing. What it does not do is create a cold moment. That's the precision. The tone is warm. The boundary is firm. These are not opposites. In a man with genuine authority, they coexist without friction. Now, what if she presses? What if the question comes back, slightly reworded? That's information, not a crisis, just information. A second push, especially after a graceful redirect, tells you something about either her anxiety or her agenda. You don't need to conclude which, you simply note it. You maintain the same temperature. And you trust that the pattern will clarify itself over time, because it always does. What men in this age range sometimes forget is that time is one of their greatest assets in this context. Not money, not status, time and patience. A woman whose interest in you is primarily financial will not sustain effort through months of genuine connection building. She'll either reveal herself through continued pressure or she'll quietly lose interest when she realizes she can't quickly map your resources. Either outcome is useful. Neither requires you to be cold, suspicious, or defensive. And a woman whose interest in you is genuine will respect, often deeply, the fact that you don't hand yourself over immediately. She'll read your composure as the character evidence it is. There's also a practical layer worth naming. Many men over 60 have complicated financial structures, trusts, business interests, obligations to adult children, estate considerations. Disclosing those things casually, even without bad intentions on her part, creates risk. Not paranoia, just the basic prudence of a man who's dealt with enough complexity to know that information shared carelessly has consequences. Protecting what you've built isn't selfishness, it's stewardship. We've moved from the scene to the psychology, through the nuance into the strategy. But the deepest layer is none of those things. It's about who you are when no one is performing. Consider the man who built something real over decades. He learned, usually through loss, not comfort. that what he was willing to protect was a reflection of what he truly valued, the business he didn't sell under pressure, the terms he refused to accept, the partnership he walked away from, the decision to rebuild after the divorce rather than collapse. Every act of principled restraint left a mark, not on anyone else, but on his understanding of himself. The dinner table moment is, in miniature, the same test, not because the stakes are as high, they aren't, but because the quality of your response in low-stakes moments is exactly what trains your character for high-stakes ones. A man who can be flattered into revealing what he decided not to reveal, not through manipulation, but simply through wanting to impress, is practicing a kind of slow erosion of his own judgment. And men at this stage of life have usually seen what that erosion looks like taken to its conclusion. They've watched peers make decisions in the warm glow of new attraction that they'd never have made in their clearest moments. They've seen it in business, in legal agreements, in second marriages, entered with the same impulsiveness that should have been left in their 30s. The awareness of that pattern is one of the gifts of this decade. But awareness only converts into authority when it's embodied, when it isn't just something you understand intellectually, but something that lives in how you carry yourself, how you pace your disclosures, how you let connection develop on a timeline that serves the relationship rather than your need for immediate validation. That's the thing worth sitting with. The need for immediate validation doesn't disappear with age. It changes costume. In your 30s, it might have been wanting to be seen as successful. In your 60s, it might be wanting to be seen as still successful, still relevant, still the kind of man a particular kind of woman would pursue for the right reasons. The costume is different. The vulnerability underneath is similar. Naming it doesn't diminish you. It frees you from being driven by it without knowing it. And that freedom produces something visible. Men who aren't quietly trying to prove their worth don't need to either broadcast it or guard it anxiously. They move with a different weight, unhurried, undefended, genuinely at ease with what they've built because they're no longer performing it for an audience. That quality is rarer than wealth. It's rarer than status. And it's the thing that genuinely discerning people, the ones actually worth your time, recognize immediately. Legacy isn't what you leave behind financially. Every estate attorney can manage that. Legacy is the quality of discernment you modeled while you were living. What you protected, what you opened and when. How you made decisions about trust, not from fear, not from need, but from a clear understanding of your own values. The man who handled that dinner table moment with quiet precision, warm but self-possessed, engaged but unhurried, isn't just protecting his assets. He's demonstrating to himself more than anyone else that the decades of experience left him more capable, not less, more measured, not more defended. That's a different kind of arrival than most people imagine for this stage of life. Not a retreat from risk, but a refinement of judgment. Not suspicion as a default, but clarity as a practice. So here's the question worth carrying. If you remove the financial variable entirely, if it simply didn't exist, what would the quality of your presence in that conversation reveal about who you've become? Because that man, the one whose steadiness doesn't depend on having something to protect, is the one who doesn't need to prove he's built well. He already knows. And quietly, that knowing is the most authoritative thing in the room. If this reached something real in you, share it with a man who's ready to hear it.